Welcome back, everyone. It's been a while since I've done a general uranium video. Today's is about how the URA ETF is doing something that could present some tactical investors with an opportunity, headwinds or tailwinds. Just something interesting to know about. So let's get into it. So before we get into what the URA is doing, I just feel it's important to point out that I'm not a big fan of this ETF. It's not what it used to be and not what it's necessarily trying to be, but I've made a complete other video on that, so this isn't about that. So this ETF is big money trying to hold things that big money doesn't normally hold. And that's creating some issues because some of the names in the index have become basically too small for the ETF to be holding them or to be worth holding them. And they're quite illiquid. So what does it do when it needs to get rid of them? Well, it sells them. So what's the problem with selling small, tiny, illiquid companies? Well, that's just it. All of that. Before, they owned millions of shares of these tiny, tiny companies. And now they're tiny, tiny companies. And trying to sell it is into an illiquid market is pushing the price down. So when it's trying to get rid of some things, it can be forcibly selling, taking time, pushing the prices lower and lower and lower. And it kind of doesn't care because it kind of just needs to get rid of them. It doesn't necessarily care about its own portfolio. So this creates a bit of a self-cannibalizing effect. Now, what does this look like for some of the names, you might ask? And herein is the potential for opportunity. Well, Peninsula was removed on February 8th of this year. And if you look back a few years ago, Laramide was removed in 2015, I believe, basically at the bottom. And it performed nicely after. Now, this isn't saying that Peninsula will, it's just saying it this ETF may be done at selling, and I'll get into that. First, here's a list of some of the other names that the ETF is either getting rid of or trying to get rid of, or if these names are part of the index that it's tracking that require it to have less than what it does have. So these might be some names that could be pushed downwards in the future if the ETF decides to try and flush them out and get rid of all the shares, at which point all of the headwinds would be at its back and it may have been pushed to a point where it's cheaper than other stocks relative to where it historically maybe should be. I know there's a lot of maybe should be's in there, but this is just looking at specific highly illiquid tiny names. So there's a lot of interpretation to be had. On the flip side, if you look at two names that I noticed, for example, Paladin Energy and Yellowcake, they should be added to the ETF if it picks up the amount of them that it should be for the index that it's tracking. So these are two names that could have tailwinds at their back in the near term. So back to reiterating why these things may happen. Well, it's because the URA ETF tracks an index, and this index is supposed to, again, I don't think it necessarily does the greatest job, but it's supposed to track nuclear centered companies, uranium miners, and such. Now, the index changes from time to time, and while that's easy for the index to change, when the ETF actually has to push out the shares to make room and use the money for new ones, there's a bit of a delay and a bit of drag because it's hard to trade big size on small names. So that's why there's a bit of a delay here and why the ETF is showing some changes that it looks like it should do. But again, they may not. But I mean, also showing the changes that they need to make to the index for the ETF. Yes, it is probably some type of legal showing what you need to show your investors, but it's also kind of laughable because it this whole ETF, this whole situation is basically how I see it is if ETFs go wrong and just break the companies inside it in slow motion and market destruction, I don't know, a whole bunch of bad stuff in slow motion is coming out of this some of what this ETF is being forced to do because of this whole situation. Not to mention the timing is also rather terrible in my view. And in addition to that, the the components of the ETF are just so not what they seem to be. But anyway, that's it for today. I just thought that this information might be interesting. If any of these names, if any of these stocks are on your list, just something to be aware of what you're watching, what you're seeing. Maybe it might explain some of the price movements, bit of headwinds, tailwinds, just to know, you know, be cautious or not. Now, yep, that there could be temporarily mispriced things. So I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you have a great day.